Well, good morning. Social Studies 20-2 here, looking at source number 2. We're looking at internment as our theme of the week for our sources. So this is an actual, a facsimile of a poster that would have been seen in British Columbia in 1942. I'll give you a few seconds to read it over and look for some details, then we'll talk about it. Hmm. Okay, so the first thing clearly is the title, Japanese Males Notice to Report. They need to report to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And then later on, they say just the men need to do that. Their families don't need to accompany them. It does not sound good. It sounds like they're going to be there for a while and they're going to be split up from their family. I think the date is important, so we're looking at April in 1942. So there's enough there now that you can go ahead and figure out what the source is alluding to. We've got enough clues already considered. Date, place, 1942, participants, Japanese males. I also saw the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And then I have to be thinking too, who's giving this issue, who's issuing this order? I would guess the Canadian government, War Measures Act. So that would be stuff that you would fill in under participants, Japanese males, Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Canadian government. Your evidence, well, it's just the wording on the poster. That would have been a poster that was very common in Vancouver, British Columbia, and all of BC for that matter. Your historical case study, well, it is referring to the internment of the Japanese Canadians during World War II under the Canadian War Measures Act. That's your historical case study. And you might talk a bit more about what happened. You might say, well, I would say that, this was done because the Canadian government viewed Japanese Canadians as a threat. Uh, and I'd explain a bit about why. It's because they had bombed Pearl Harbor, the U.S., and the thinking was that if they can bomb Pearl Harbor, America, maybe the west coast of Canada is at risk too. So there was a lot of fear mongering, maybe even scapegoating, and as well, Japan was part of the Axis powers during World War II, and Canada was already fighting uh, Italy and Germany, and Japan was part of that alliance. So technically, I guess you could say we were kind of at war with them already too. But I talk a bit about why that poster was put up, the reasoning behind it. You'd want to establish that. And you might even talk about what some of the results were, how many were locked up and forcibly confined. Families were split in two. The men went to one camp, females went to another. All of those things you might write about under the historical case study. Connection to nationalism, well, I see ethnocentrism for sure. That's leading to discrimination. This is not an ethnic cleansing. They weren't killed in the concentration camps. They were mistreated. Of course, they were abused, but it wasn't an ethnic cleansing. Um, you might talk about indoctrination because the government would have needed to have used propaganda to turn Canadian citizens against the Japanese Canadians. And of course, you can talk about ultranationalism. This is an ultranationalist policy when you're interning people based on race and ethnicity. That is ultranationalism. Finally, perspectives. Well, when you look at the poster, be thinking, what would the Japanese Canadian be thinking? They'd probably feel outraged. A lot of them were Canadian citizens. They were loyal to Canada. Why would they be suspected in the first place? So probably they're outraged, angry, sad. They're going to be split up from their family. What would Japanese Canadians think when they look at that poster? What would their families think? What would the Canadian government think? When they put up that poster, what's going through their minds? To them, this is something they need to do to protect Canada's population, to protect the future of Canada. And the third perspective I might examine, what would an average Canadian citizen think when they look at that? What would be going through their mind? Because of propaganda and so on, they would probably be in agreement with the poster too. They probably don't have anything personal against the Japanese Canadians, but they might have bought into the fear mongering and scapegoating, and they think that they need to blame them too. That's probably about all I would do with that source. We'll do our third one tomorrow.